It's not even discovering who you are. It's deciding who you are. You choose it. You decide it. You make it happen. You are creating your life in every minute and you don't even know it. If you want to change the world, you start with yourself and then you just impact one other person.
Hi guys, and welcome back to Awaken Minds podcast. Today we have an incredible guest, Peter Alessandria. He's an award-winning photographer and videographer, guest speaker at TEDx talks on 5 important things he's learned about forgiveness, author of the book Better Than You Think You Are, and also has his own website, which I will link in the description box below. Guys, today I welcome you, Peter Alessandria.
Yeah, so first I just want to say thanks for having me on the show. Natalie, I've been a fan of your work for quite a while. And Jimmy, the fact that you're from New Jersey, you're automatically okay. So thank you. So my story, you know, I grew up in the New York City area. I went to college in upstate New York. I studied economics and business. And then I went to law school because I didn't want to get a job after college. And I got my MBA, got my law degree, and I thought, well, if I have to be a lawyer, what kind of lawyer would I like to be? And I thought, entertainment lawyer. So I bought a one-way plane ticket for Los Angeles. I moved to LA, found a job, worked in the film business for maybe 15 years or so. And what happened was during that, one of the perks of being a lawyer for the production companies was that I got to go on the set while they were making the movies. And I didn't know anything about filmmaking at that time. And I was just completely fascinated with the whole process and fell in love with it, basically. And this was around the time that the Sundance Film Festival was becoming popular. You know, independent films were coming out. And I was meeting a lot of independent filmmakers. And so I just kind of got the bug. And I don't even know how I did it, but I taught myself lighting, camera angles, you know, production, the whole thing. I ended up writing, producing, and directing a bunch of short films. And then a couple of years later, I fell in love with still photography. I had not really been exposed as a kid or anything like that. I picked up a camera for the first time, a still camera, when I was about 35 years old. So it wasn't like a lifelong thing for me, but when I got into it, I really got into it. And so I learned photography, I learned filmmaking. And then in 2009, after the global financial crisis, I was still working as a lawyer up until that point. I lost my law practice. Within a matter of months, I went from a really nice 6-figure income to nothing. And I tried to resurrect my business, and the economy was in shambles. I don't know if you guys remember the global financial crisis, but it was tough. I said, let me turn this into something positive. And so I said, you know, what do I really love to do? And every time I asked myself that question, the answer was the same. It was photography, filmmaking, videography. It was some kind of visual arts. And so I really agonized over this because, you know, here I'd been a lawyer for 20 years. I mean, was I really going to leave that behind? And eventually I just took the plunge and I said, okay, I'm going to do this. And at the same time, I moved back to the East Coast. My parents were getting a little older, and my sisters started having kids. So I had all these nieces and nephews, and I don't have any kids of my own, but I was constantly flying back for recitals and birthdays and holidays. So I just moved back east. So I landed in New Jersey, not far from where Jimmy is, and told everybody I'm a professional photographer now, and I'm going to start my own business. And for 3 years, nothing happened. I set up some websites, and I had trained myself. Like, I'd gotten pretty good with my camera. And at first, guys, I thought, well, you know what? It must be the economy, because the economy was still kind of rough. And I thought, well, maybe it's not the economy. And I said, well, you know, I'm not trained in photography or art, you know. I don't have an education in that. And I realized, well, maybe that's not it. And then at one point, I was even convinced it was because I didn't have the latest and greatest camera equipment. Turns out none of that was the problem. The problem wasn't out there. The problem was in here. And I just had this really negative self-image when it came to being a creative person. I was terrified to put myself out there. It's almost a little embarrassing to say it, but I got to be honest about it. And I was just, and I was kind of stuck on the couch, imagining that I was going to be a professional photographer, but not really taking the steps that were necessary to do that.
Right.
So after almost 3 years, the money started to run out because I had saved up quite a bit of money from my prior career, And so I realized, well, I got to do something. If I'm going to make this work, I got to do something. Now, for 30 years, 25 years, I had been studying spiritual growth, personal growth, law of attraction, all the stuff that a new thought person would kind of immerse themselves in. And I realized, well, now I got to practice. I got to put all that stuff into practice. So I started working on what I realized was the problem. And the problem, as I said, the problem was my thinking. And several years earlier, I had been I was in an argument with somebody once, and she stopped and she said, she put her hands on her hips and she was real mean. She said, "Who do you think you are?" And I was like, wow, what a great question.
She was from New Jersey, right?
Yeah, right.
I'm only kidding. Okay. Sorry.
I was like, it just stopped me in my tracks. I said, what a great question. Who do I think I am? Now, I'm going to talk about my book in a minute, but the original title of my book was, Who Do You Think You Are? And I realized this is the most important question we can ask ourselves, because whoever we think we are is exactly who we're going to end up being in life. So I began to look at this question, who am I? And I realized I had a lot of, now I told you guys, I watched your interview with Patricia Farrell, and she talked about this. She says, and this is, this was my conclusion as well. As little kids, we come into the world, and she said we're a tape recorder. I'll say that we're a hard drive, and that hard drive is empty. And through our experiences with our family and growing up and all that, we get programmed. And we have all these experiences, and it begins to form our personality, and it begins to form our idea about ourselves, our self-concept. And so if you have negative experiences, those get written on the hard drive. And what I realized, was at this point, I was in my 40s, and I realized that I was still living my life based on the conclusions of a 5-year-old. I had come to certain conclusions about who I was based on my interpretation of what was going on around me. And I learned things through my own mind that there was something about me that was not okay. I wasn't good enough. I didn't have what it took. I was unlovable. I wasn't capable, and I had all these negative ideas about myself. Now, what happens is when you're a kid, that stuff is really painful. And so we repress it or suppress it, whatever you want to call it. And it ends up in our subconscious mind. But the tapes, the hard drive, the programs are still running. And so we're not even aware. As I said, I had done all this work on myself, 12-step programs, self-help books, workshops, you name it, I did it. And I was still being run by the subconscious program that says, they're not going to like you. You're not good enough. You don't have what it takes. You're going to be criticized. You're going to be rejected. So as I talk about in my book, I realized that I had to reprogram. I mean, it's literally a process of reprogramming. And so I took all this stuff that I've been studying for years, like affirmations, vision statements, anything I could do to reprogram this negative programming. But the thing was, I had to become aware of it first. See, a lot of people try to use affirmations. They try to do all the therapy, whatever it is to change, but they're not aware of the subconscious, unconscious thoughts and beliefs that are running our lives. And so if you don't address what's underneath all the apparently conscious stuff, it's very difficult to change. And the conclusion that I came to was I needed to see myself differently. I needed to see myself as lovable. I needed to see myself as good enough. I needed to see myself as capable. I needed to see myself as a good person. I carried all this baggage about who I was based on, and here's the kicker. It turns out that it was all a mistake. It was all a mistake. It was the mind of a 5-year-old who didn't know how to interpret what was going on in my family and my life, and came to these erroneous conclusions that I wasn't even aware were running my life. And now I had to undo all of that.
You just know that there's more to life than, eat, sleep, work, repeat. We've been conditioned. Jimmy talks about this all the time, going to school, you're put in a box, you have to put your hand up to speak. You can't use your creative side. It's write what's been written on the board and that's the answers. Like there's no room for thinking and being creative. And so I just love bringing up this in conversation and really sharing with everyone that it's time to step back and take the mask off and really view yourself from a blank slate and think of your own emotions, feel your own emotions, what's going on around you that you haven't really paid attention to, and stop thinking of the outside perspective, how others view you, because how others view you is almost like you in a whole nother reality, because that's not really you. And so there's just so much to unpack in this conversation.
That's great, Natalie. I totally relate to that. And I think a lot of people do. The thing is, at a certain point, I had to start taking responsibility for my life. And this was a big part of my recovery from addictions, but it was also a big part of just moving my life forward. Most of my life, I felt like everybody else had to change so I could feel better. And it's not to say that other people didn't act inappropriately at times. It's also not to say that I haven't acted inappropriately. But I needed to start taking responsibility for my side of the street. And I needed to do things that reinforced a positive self-image,
Right.
and that my whole life I was looking for other people to tell me that I was okay. Because underneath all this, I felt so not okay. Now, the reality is, it's nobody else's job to tell me that I'm okay. I have to tell myself that. And what I found was I would do all kinds of things to get approval. I made a film once. This was back in the day, but I made a short film. I rented out a theater in Beverly Hills. Like 200 people came. They watched it. At the end, everybody stood up and they applauded, and it was this amazing thing. And then they all left. It was over. And I sat there and I thought, that's it? I worked 6 months on this thing and I put all this energy and it was because I was still looking for something outside of me to validate me and to tell me that I'm a good person, that I'm capable, that I'm talented, whatever. I really needed to begin to look at that. And then the other part of the equation is affirmations and all that are great. But in this realm, at least, in the physical realm where we all seem to be, you also have to get into action. You got to take steps to move forward. It's really not enough just to sit on the couch and meditate. That's helpful. And what that does is it will change your state, because as we'll talk about in a minute, our state is very important in terms of success or failure and all of that. But eventually I had to start doing things like cold calling, to get clients for my photography business. I had to start submitting my work to shows and exhibitions. I had to start posting my photos on Facebook. I was so far in the hole of low self-esteem that I was afraid to post photos on Facebook. That's how far gone I was, So I needed to just take these action steps to begin to say, what, I am good enough. And it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. There's a saying when we work on issues like codependency and all of that, there's a thing that we say, which is what other people think of me is none of my business.
Exactly. I love that so much. I love that Patricia, again, she told me that, right?
I told that to my daughter today. We went to dinner today and I told her, I said, the worst thing I ever did in my life was conform to society's norms for me instead of being the norm for me. You know what I'm saying?
I think also what's really important here is living your authentic self, because we're living in a society where we do conform to appease others. And that's been one of my issues as Patricia, because I know that you've seen her video, but I love bringing her up because as a psychic, she was able to bring up the flaws within myself. And she did say that, I had a lot of uncertainty energy. I had a lot of appeasing others to not have others not like me. I really had a self-image that people really like me because I'm easily relatable, but that's not the case. I was really conforming to others and doing it so that I had to give away a part of myself in order to make them feel more special and giving away my power. But, you know, that's not living your authentic self, and that's caring too much of what others think. And I really feel like that's a huge downfall. And we really need to step back and go, wait a minute, but what do I want? And why am I always constantly hurting myself and not really taking the time to think about what I truly want? And when you do step into your authentic self, doors open.
People pleasing all, but I did it. I can only speak for myself, but I realize now that number one, it was a coping mechanism. It was a way for me to feel safe. It was a way for me to get my needs met, you know, and ultimately it was a way for me to feel powerful, because if I could solve your problems and relieve your pain, I felt valuable, I felt worthy, I felt important, but most of all, I felt powerful. And it was a false sense of power, but that was my coping strategy. That was just what I did because I hadn't learned another way to take care of myself, to stay safe in a relationship, to feel powerful, to feel loved. So I went through all of that, Natalie. I totally get it. And ultimately, I have to love that part of myself. I have to love the part of myself that was so afraid of being rejected that I did some crazy stuff to get approval from other people and to, you know, fix people and take care of them. And, you know, all this taking responsibility for other people's feelings and all of that when it's got nothing to do with me. So I try to love that part of myself, to recognize and to understand that it was just a strategy. It was just a way of coping that ultimately, and at the time, it actually served me because I didn't know how else to do it. I didn't even know this was a problem. I thought being nice to people and saying yes to them and all that was the way you were supposed to be. Now, you could say it's conforming, you know, I don't know. I see other people do it because they don't know any better either. So I don't know that it's a conspiracy like that. Yeah, I mean, we're all just doing the best that we can, you know, and a lot of us bring baggage and issues and all of that. The point is now we have an opportunity to begin to shift all of that. And so that's one of the reasons I wrote my book.
Right. Can we dive into some of the chapters in your book? What is the main chapter for you that stands out? I know forgiveness is quite huge, and we probably should dive into that, but what's one of your most important chapters in that book?
So for me, it's chapters 1, 2, and 3 kind of set the tone for the whole book. Chapter 1 is entitled, Who Do You Think You Are? It's all about becoming aware of those subconscious programs that I was talking about a minute ago, all those subconscious thoughts and beliefs. Chapter 2 is entitled Taking Responsibility, and chapter 3 is entitled True Power. Those 3 chapters build the foundation for my whole philosophy, and any achievement or success that I've had comes from working with those 3 things. So we talked a little bit about reprogramming and all of that. Chapter 2 is about taking responsibility. Now, why is that important? Well, as I said earlier, most of my life, I thought it was everybody else that had to change so I could feel better, right? I wasn't taking responsibility for, there are 4 things that I'm responsible for in this world: my thoughts, my feelings, my words, and my actions, okay? Now, there's an important relationship between those 4 things. My thoughts lead to my feelings lead to my words and actions, and my words and actions lead to the outcomes that I experience in life. So if I start with crappy thoughts, I'm going to have crappy feelings. If I have crappy feelings, I'm going to speak crappy words and take crappy actions. And if I speak crappy words and take crappy actions, I'm going to have crappy outcomes.
I just love that.
Until I'm willing to take responsibility for that, I'm going to be certain that it's everybody else's fault that I have crappy outcomes in my life.
Right.
Now, here's a really important thing to know about responsibility. And I used to be a lawyer. So responsibility is not the same as blame. See, most of us equate responsibility with liability, with guilt, with blame, with shame. It's not about any of that. The way I talk about responsibility, and again, I heard Patricia talk about this, is accountability. It's being willing to be accountable for the effects of our choices and our decisions, our actions. And it doesn't include making ourselves wrong for anything. Beating ourselves up never makes us better people. Remember that.
Yeah.
So this has been my process, is to begin to acknowledge that, I'm responsible for how I experience my life. I'm not responsible for what other people do or don't do, but I am responsible for how I respond to that. And again, Natalie, I don't know if you got to this chapter, this section of my book, but Patricia was talking about the difference between responding and reacting.
Yep, I was
Okay?
just about to
This
bring
is
that up.
This is an important distinction. If I'm reacting, chances are I'm reenacting the past and I'm acting out of habit. Whereas responding, this word responsibility, respondability, the ability to respond, which means I have to take a pause. I have to take stock of what's going on around me. I have to say, all right, what's my part in this? Is there, who do I want to be in this situation? Actually, that's the most important question we can ever ask. Who do I want to be in this situation? And when I ask that question and then take responsibility for seeing that through, nobody has power over me. Nobody controls me. Nobody forces me to conform to anything. I become sovereign in myself, because the next step, chapter 3 in my book, is true power. Now, why is this important? There's a very specific relationship between responsibility and power. They're two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. So until I'm willing to take responsibility for my experience, I can't do anything to change it. I suddenly become powerless, because I'm saying, well, it's your fault that I feel the way I feel, so I can't change my situation. You have to change so I can feel better, or whatever, whatever.
So true. I love that, because you're giving your power away to someone else, which says you obviously can't fix this situation, and it's just not true. All you have to do is take a step back, breathe in, ground yourself a little, and just think about what you're going to say. And not a lot of people do this.
So here's the thing. Don't wait until the last minute to try to do all this. Okay? Have a daily practice. So when you get in the situation, when the stuff is hitting the fan, you already know how you're going to respond. It's like I talk about in my book. It's if you have, let's say you have a stressful event coming up. Maybe it's a meeting with a client, a new client. Maybe it's a family event, whatever it is. Don't wait until you get there to decide how you're going to handle it. Figure it out ahead of time. Who do I want to be in this situation? What's the outcome that I want to experience? How am I going to deal with those comments by my Uncle Fred? Or how am I going to deal with, when my mother takes a shot at me for, the way I'm dressed, whatever it might be. Don't wait until you get there to figure all that out. But this is part of taking responsibility for my life. And for many years, I didn't want to take responsibility. So I waited till the last minute, and then I got all upset and I blamed them. When in reality, I had not done what I needed to do to take care of myself. That's my definition of resentment. Now, we're going to talk about forgiveness in a few minutes, but again, resentment, Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous says resentment is the #1 offender. Another word for resentment is a grievance. Resentment is a form of anger, in some cases hatred. And we use that to hurt ourselves and others without realizing that. And for me, I realize now that resentment means only one thing. I have not done what I needed to do to take care of myself in that situation. And now I'm blaming somebody else for that. And the anger that I think I feel towards them is really misdirected anger that I feel towards myself, because I didn't plan ahead. I didn't set healthy boundaries. We're going to talk a lot about healthy boundaries in a minute, because you can't do forgiveness without knowing how to have healthy boundaries. So we have a responsibility before we even get in that unpleasant situation at work, at home, wherever, in traffic, in the parking lot. I joke that the streets, highways, and parking lots of New Jersey are a safer place now that I'm doing all this work on myself, because I was a nightmare, and I was always justified. See, here's the thing, guys. We always feel justified in what we do because they did it first, or they said this, or they said that. but that means we're saying they have power over us. And that is the biggest lie we tell ourselves. Nobody has power over us.
That's right. Yeah, we
Nobody.
accept that or we don't. You know, if you're a God, if you're the director of your life, then nothing can affect you but what you allow it to affect you. Right?
Hell yeah, brother. Hell yeah. I mean, that's the truth. So the biggest lie that that we tell ourselves is when we say, "You make me feel."
It's not really a lie. It's a fucking escape from responsibility. It's an escape. You say, hey, it's that guy. It ain't me. It can't be me. Why would I be such an asshole? But you are. Just
Well, yes, I want from a person who never won an award for anything in my life to somebody who's won more than 75 awards for my photography. And the only reason that has happened, the only reason is because I went from being my own worst enemy to my own best friend. All right. And when I started this journey, I was like, everybody was saying, well, you have to do self-love. And I'm like, what the fuck is self-love? Do I take myself out on a date? Do I buy myself flowers? I can
buy myself flowers.
That's how far out I was. I actually did those things.
I was expecting that. Holy shit.
But it's really learning how to treat ourselves the way we would treat somebody that we loved.
Right.
So we don't call ourselves names. We don't call other people's names. You know, we don't put ourselves in compromising situations because we want attention or love or affection. You know, we don't sell. I don't give my work away. People used to say all the time, you know, companies, they would want to take my photos and use them in one of their campaigns or something like that. And they say, oh, but we'll give you credit. I said, no, I don't want credit. I do this. This is how I support myself.
Yeah.
You got to pay if you want to play, you know, but a lot of people don't have that self-confidence. They don't have that self-love, which are really the same thing.
And self-worth as well, you know, knowing what you're worthy of, and the fact that, you know, you can't just allow people to, again, take your power and say, hey, but I'll give you this. It's no, you got to stop giving your power away and acknowledge that within yourself.
Yes, exactly. And there are some instances where I have actually licensed my photos for free, but there was some tangible benefit that came back to me. The point is, we get to decide all of this. Nobody is making me give my work away for free. Nobody is making me feel anything or do anything or say anything.
Right.
So it really comes down to this idea that, and so here's the thing. So what is power? All right, this is chapter 3 of my book. Most of us think of power as having power over other people, getting them to do something that we want them to do, or other people having power over us. That's not true power. True power is power over ourselves. And the way I define true power is the ability to consciously choose and or change my thoughts, feelings, words, and actions. Those are the only 4 things that I have power over, but those are the only 4 things that I need power over to have the life that I want.
Right. How did you discover for yourself that you needed to change your thoughts, feelings, actions? You know, what was the driving factor that got you to change and observe? Was it because of the, you know, the classes, the self-help and things like that? Or is this something that just kind of clicked one day?
Well, like I said, I spent 3 years on the couch and the money ran out. So I can't think of a better motivator, you know, than you know, how am I going to pay my bills?
It was a good 3 years though, right?
Yeah, it was kind of good, but, you know, I was wasting time on, you know, I was playing Angry Birds and computer games when I needed to be building my business.
Right.
But I was hiding out. Here's the point, guys. I was hiding out from life because I was so sure that I didn't have what it took. They weren't going to like me. I was going to be rejected and it was going to be painful. And I didn't know how to cope with that. I had no sense of, at least as an attorney, I had a diploma on the wall and I was top 10% of my law school class. I had all this outside validation. But when it came to being a creative person, I never even took an art appreciation class in college. You know, I'm completely self-taught as a photographer, as a filmmaker, you know, so and it was that was the vehicle for all my insecurity to come out. Plus, you know, being an artist, let me just say this real quick. Being an artist means showing your work. And showing your work means you risk criticism, you risk rejection, you risk those kinds of things. That was my hang up.
As a former lawyer and all, you're the analytical brain, the left brain, the person that thinks about science and all this. What was it that made you skip from that side of life that people never change from? I mean, if you look at lawyers, doctors, and all this, most of them never leave that left-brained, analytical side of their life to ever come to anything spiritual at all in their lives. I deal with doctors all the time, and they are not there. So my question for you is, how did you, as an entertainment lawyer in Hollywood, in the depths of all of that, wondering how did you come out of that? How did you decide that you'd be different from that analytical part of life?
It was just who I was. It's just who I am, you know? So I guess part of it for me was having done all those workshops and studying spirituality. It was almost like I was denying myself my true nature by staying in that business, in that profession. Now, my family thought I was nuts. But luckily, I have a supportive family, and I don't actually, doesn't really matter what they think about me anyway anymore. And now they're very supportive. You know, they're really, everybody's behind. I mean, I'm on my newest venture, which I'll talk about in a little bit. You know, I'm really kind of hanging out there in the wind on this, but everybody's been very supportive and encouraging. And part of it is because I am supportive and encouraging of them, and I'm supportive and encouraging of myself. So remember, I was afraid of criticism. I was afraid of rejection. And the first few years on Facebook, you know, I get so much love and so much appreciation on social media in general. It's great. And early on, I would get some criticism. And that ended up being the subject of my TEDx talk. Somebody attacked me on Facebook for a photo of New York City. So, you can see my photos at peteralessandriaphotography.com. You can go on my Facebook, my Instagram. A lot of my photos are New York City, and a lot of them are kind of very unique photos. It's not just a snapshot of the city. I do a lot of photography at night with the full moon. I have an app that tells me where the moon is coming up and going down, and I plot the trajectory and I align it with various landmarks like the Statue of Liberty, the Empire State Building, and all that. But I also do some very unique photos of New York City from New Jersey with these big telephoto lenses. They're like the lenses you see on Sunday on the sidelines of the football games, those long telephoto lenses. And one of the photos that I was posting at the time was, and maybe Natalie, I'll send it to you if you want to edit it and put it in the discussion here.
Yeah.
It's a photo of the Empire State Building and the Statue of Liberty, and they appear to be lined up, like right next to each other. And somebody accused me of photoshopping that, saying it was a fake photo. Now, it's an actual photograph. It was taken from Bayonne, New Jersey, with a long 600 millimeter telephoto lens. And I was 2 miles away from the Statue of Liberty, and then I was another 5 miles away from the Empire State Building. But from that specific location, everything lines up perfectly. And because you're shooting across Greenwich Village, there are no tall buildings in the way. And yes, it looks like they're right next to each other, but there was no Photoshop or anything involved. It's all the camera, the lens, actually, it's like a telescope. And what it does is it brings distant objects, they appear closer. So it's an optical thing, but it's not fake. I mean, you can do it with anybody who has that camera and that lens can do it. So anyway, this guy went after me on Facebook and accused me of, and it wasn't the first time. Now, at that time, I was still afraid of criticism and rejection. Today, I have zero concern about that, and so nobody criticizes me anymore. You got to remember, life reflects back to us, and again, Patricia was talking about this. Life will reflect back to us who we think we are. This is why this question of who do you think you are? This is why this question of who do you think you are is so important, because it's the law of attraction. It's not even the law of attraction. It's the law of resonance. And what that means,
yes.
what that
Yes,
means
sir.
is you don't get what you want, you get who you are.
I
All right.
literally just
So
made a post on Facebook.
Thank you.
It said, if you want the key to law of attraction, look in the mirror, because
Love
you
you.
are it. You are
Boom.
what you get, and you are what you receive. So if you want to be a badass bitch, you got to get up and you got to be that badass bitch. Otherwise, you can't just sit there and think a thought and hope that it works, or burn a piece of paper that says this is what's going to happen. Like, you need to be and embody that part of you that you want to become, right? And here you are, Peter, a great example of truth to that statement. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. And so it's really important to be aware of, what thoughts what vibrations am I projecting out onto the world? And those vibrations come from our thoughts and our feelings. Feelings are literally energy in motion, emotion, energy in motion. So, so I'm going to, if people are really interested in the story, it's in my book with the guy on Facebook. It's also on my TEDx talk, which you can find on my website, bebiggertoday.com. There's a link to that. But the long story short is I did not react to this guy. I responded. And the way I responded was I did not get into a pissing match with him, a public, argument. Yes, it's a real photo. No, you're full of shit. Yes, it's a real photo. I DM'd him. I reached out to him privately, and I established a relationship. Is basically what I did. And he even, the first response I got from him on the DM, he's a typical hardcore New Yorker. He's like, "You're full of shit. That's Photoshopped," And he was, and I never lowered myself to his level.
Right.
And then the other thing that I do is I study A Course in Miracles. Now, A Course in Miracles has been my main spiritual practice for almost 30 years.
Okay.
And the Course says all attacks are a call for love. So what I realized in that moment was I had a choice whether or not I was going to take his comments personally, or whether I was going to say, let me find out what's going on with this guy, because why does he feel this need to attack me? He doesn't even know me, and he feels this need to attack me, and I'm thinking he must be having a bad day or something. I mean, even if it is a fake photograph, why did he have to get so worked up about it? Now, I found out why later, and I'll tell you in a minute. I'll tell you what happened. But so I said, let me get to know this guy. So eventually, I kept with it. I didn't blow him off. I could have blocked him. I could have done all that stuff. And I said, there's something. And here's the thing, guys. I had done that other stuff before, and it never felt good. It always felt like, even though, quote unquote, they were attacking me and I was in the right, I knew that it was a real photo. It still never felt right. So I said, let me see this thing through. Let me find out what's really going on. Let me see if there's a way I can actually be helpful to this person. Again, if you have to attack somebody you don't know over something as inconsequential in the scheme of life as a photo of New York City, you got some issues, right? So maybe there's a way that I can be of service to this person. So we established this relationship. Eventually, I actually agreed to take him to the spot in Bayonne. He's from New York. He'd never been to New Jersey, but I said, you got to go to New Jersey because the best views of Manhattan are from New Jersey. I said, I'll take you to the spot where I took the photo. So I think that got his attention, and he finally let his guard down a little bit. And I established a relationship with him. So here's what happened. He eventually became a customer of mine.
Awesome.
He went from accusing me of doing fake photos to actually licensing one of my images for his souvenir business. He was in the souvenir business. And so now here's where it gets interesting. So he was also a photographer and an artist. And what he was doing was he was photoshopping his images to put on postcards and T-shirts and coffee mugs for the tourists in New York City, which is fine. He was creating art that was collectible or souvenirs. It's totally fine. but one of his images resembled one of mine. So he was projecting his own guilt about photoshopping his image onto me.
Yeah.
That's why he was so upset.
And that's what
Right.
we tend to do in life. You know, if you see someone coming at you, you got to think, well, what is it that they're projecting on me? And it's the same for ourselves. You know, when you get frustrated with a person or you want to bitch about someone, you got to wonder, why are you like that? What is it that you haven't looked at within yourself that you're bringing up about somebody else? Because we are all mirror reflections of each other, because we are all connected and we are all one and the same. And so
Yes.
when you have that conversation with someone about this other person, what is it within yourself? And it will come to fruition. You will see what it is about you that you didn't see, because when you do the shadow work, all is revealed, and it's absolutely an incredible journey. So yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. That was a really awesome example.
Two good shadow books, Dark Side of the Light Chasers by Debbie Ford,
Right.
and The Secret of the Shadow. Part of my step work in 12-step recovery, in the 6th step, I did a lot of shadow work to reveal all that stuff that was, again, sabotaging me, blocking my life.
Yeah.
So with this guy, so now we get to this point where it's like, oh, the light bulb goes off. So he's just projecting onto me. Now we all do this, you know, and that's life is actually one big projection, but that's a whole other discussion. But in terms of our relationships, and here's the thing I learned, and I can only speak for myself, but if I'm upset by what somebody is saying about me, there's only one reason, and that is
Right.
I'm afraid that they're right. See, if I'm not
Exactly right.
afraid that they're right, then I'll never react that way, because it's not about me, it's about them. When my niece, she's 17 now, but when she was she was 8 or 9 years old, she was having trouble with kids at school, and they were saying mean things to her. And she was very upset. And I just pulled her aside one day and I just said, sweetheart, I said, this is what you have to know about this. And this is true of everybody. When somebody says something mean to you, they're really talking about themselves. So it's not about you. Don't take it personally. And she reminded me a couple of weeks ago, she said, I never forgot that you told me that. And it changed everything for her. And this is true for all of us.
No, I'm agreeing with you. Keep going. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to shut you off there, man. You're brilliant. Go ahead.
Well, I don't feel shut down at all. I actually really appreciate you guys are very tuned in and attentive. I really appreciate that. And that's an act of love, by the way. Listening to another person is one of the greatest acts of love that we can give them. So thank you guys for loving me. Right.
Thank you for saying that. Oh my Lord. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Not for nothing. Watching. I don't mean to cut nobody off. The biggest issue we have in life itself right now, between left wing, right wing, and all this shit, is that everybody talks and nobody fucking listens to shit.
Oh, thank you.
Nobody listens. Everybody thinks that, hey, I'm on this side or that side, and not for nothing. If everybody else on that side thought what I thought, then the world would be right. And all they do is project that shit to that side, or they're on this side projecting it to this side, and both of them and none of them ever listen to jack shit, and nothing ever changes. And it will never change.
Yeah.
We will be
that's
here.
not true. No, that's not true. It's going to change, and you are going to be one of the change agents for that. That's what this podcast.
If it changes.
That's what this podcast is all about. You guys are the change agents, and you are going to, Jimmy, you are going to be the one who shows many people the way to do that. You don't even know it yet. No, damn, I froze. Hold on.
I know it. Baby, I know it no matter what you think.
It's always the most unflattering pose when it freezes. So yes. Jimmy, everything you said is true. And guess what? There's a solution to all of that. And it's called forgiveness. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So let me just finish up the story. So it gets even better. Not only does he become a client of mine, a customer of mine, but he introduces me to this company that does all the souvenirs in New York City. All right. And so I didn't end up doing business with them, but I learned everything about the souvenir business from them. And then I went and I cold called the largest souvenir company in the world. And I did a 5-figure license deal for my photos. I got to show you guys. I don't have them. I usually have them with me for souvenirs. So now my photos, if you go on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan in one of those souvenir shops, you look on any of the refrigerator, I have refrigerator magnets, coffee mugs, T-shirts, postcards with my photos.
Oh, damn. We just might need you to help us with our online shop.
But get it, guys. It would have never happened if I got into a pissing match with that guy on Facebook over my photos being fake or not. None of this would have ever happened.
Incredible.
So until I change, nothing changes. But when I change, everything changes.
Speak some truth.
In the past, you know, it would have been this thing, and I would have told all my friends about what a jerk this guy was, and, you know, I'm right and he's wrong. And I had situations, this wasn't the first time this happened. I had situations where other people, other photographers, they came to my, you know, in this public, in the comments on a photo, they came and they vouched for me. They said, no, that's a legitimate photo. I know where he took it. The people still wouldn't listen because the ego gets so stuck in their defensive position. And I have an ego too. So I can only say, I was that guy. I was that guy at one time, you know? So we have to take I choose to take responsibility for all of this stuff. And part of the process of taking responsibility is I have to stop blaming everybody else for anything. Whether they're open-minded or not, in a sense, it's none of my business, you know? And the only thing I can do is love them and bless them and give them my highest intention, because that's the only way things will change.
Right.
Yes, sir. I love everything you're saying.
Defensiveness begets defensiveness, anger begets anger. So if I'm pointing the finger and saying, you guys need to be more open-minded, they're going to be like, you need to be more open-minded. And it's just becomes this whole thing. Whereas I say, okay, all right, I see you guys see things a certain way. Tell me more about that. Why do you see it that way?
And the games begin. I love that.
There is never, it's just mouths going this way and this way. It's this, it's this. It's all day long when you turn the TV on. It's this, it's this. It's like, why are you people listening to this jerk off stuff? And they listen to it in election after election. They go, and they never realize that the guy he just handed his script from the Democrats to the Republicans. It's the same shit. And in the next election, they hand that script back to the other guy, and nobody ever sits there and goes, hey, I've heard this before.
Jimmy,
why do you know that? Why do you not hear this before?
Love them, love the script, love all of it. And then use this platform that you're creating right now to begin to shift the dialogue, to shift the conversation. But we have to leave.
They don't answer shit. You know?
All these people, look, this is my belief, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but my belief, you know, my belief is that underneath all this stuff, you know, there's goodness in everybody. And we can get to that, but we can't get to it by pointing out the badness. Now, again, we'll talk about it right now. We got to have healthy boundaries. We don't want to put ourselves in harm's way trying to love other people, because then we become a doormat. Then we subject ourselves to potential harm and all of that. And then it just recreates the whole problem to begin with. So let's talk about forgiveness. Unless you guys have something else you want to talk about first.
No, go for it.
Okay, so forgiveness. All right, what is forgiveness? Forgiveness is basically making a decision, making a choice to release negative feelings about yourself or another person. Okay, it's releasing resentment. It's releasing anger. It's releasing hatred. It's literally letting it go. Okay? That's the most basic, simple definition of forgiveness that we can have.
I have learned that suppressed emotions, anger in particular, is one of the biggest emotions that causes illness and disease in the human
I'm
body.
getting to that.
Right?
I'm getting to that. Getting there. Actually, Patricia said that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the definition of forgiveness. Now, 3 points, 3 important points about forgiveness. Number one, we forgive for us. It's not for the other person. So important. We are not doing anything for anybody but ourselves.
Right, right.
It's a gift that we give to ourselves to be free of all those negative emotions. Now, as Natalie was so astute to point out a moment ago, medicine and science is finally realizing that our emotions have a profound impact on our health. Okay, I would go so far as to say that it's at least and probably more important, our mental and our emotional state on our health than anything else. So I have a video on my YouTube channel from a woman she's a healer. Her name is Seta. And she has, I just did a video for her channel, but I put it on my website on my YouTube channel because I liked it. And it's called The 5 Precursors to Cancer. And resentment, anger, this is what Patricia said, on her interview, and I've heard it from many places now. Resentment, anger, rage, grievances, they all affect our body. And it's like high blood pressure, heart disease, cancer,
chronic illness.
Well, chronic, but even, I guess heart disease is chronic. Right. It's all has an emotional.
Any chronic illness is due to an energy you kept in yourself.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly. Emotion, energy and motion. If you keep that. Now, here's the thing. Most people say this, well, all right, so I won't keep the emotion inside. I'll take it out on somebody else. But that's equally as problematic because expressing the anger towards somebody else doesn't relieve you of the emotion. You're basically just dumping your feelings on somebody else, and then we feel guilty. We feel
what
guilty.
What you're doing essentially is you're with that energy, you're now building an energy tie to that other person, which just adds more to that energy in itself. So if you go to a person and give them your shit, they're now gonna reflect that back to you, and it's just gonna create more mess.
So that's why learning how to forgive is so important, because we want to release it. We want to let it go. Now, I talk about in my book, the solution to all of this is not to get angry in the first place. Right? It's not about, I know people, there's somebody I love in my life, and she goes to the gym to work out because she gets rid of her negative emotion. But the next day she's angry again. So it's not about, yes, it's helpful to release emotion. And here's the thing. Emotion is not the problem. Negative emotions are not the problem.
I got it. Right. Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel angry. It's okay to feel afraid. They're not the problem. If you look at your kids, Natalie, or any kids, emotions will pass if we let them. Okay. It's an energy that will dissipate on its own if we don't reinforce it. The problem is when we make choices or decisions based on those negative feelings.
Yeah.
So if I make choices and decisions while I'm angry, guess what? If I make choices and decisions while I'm sad or afraid, guess what? They're not going to be the best choices and decisions.
Yeah.
So feel the feelings, have the emotions, do whatever you need to do in a constructive, healthy way to dissipate the energy, but don't make choices. Don't make decisions when you're in that emotional state. Remember, we said earlier, our state is really, really important in terms of any kind of success in the world, any kind of achievement. If we have crappy thoughts, we're going to have crappy feelings. If we have crappy feelings, we're going to speak crappy words and take crappy actions. And if we speak crappy words and take crappy actions, we're going to have crappy outcomes.
I just had an aha moment when you mentioned the woman who goes to the gym, and you said it's not a good idea to, have that thought and attachment to going to the gym to release, because every time she goes to the gym now, she's going to associate that with, releasing anger. So every time she goes to the gym, she's ready to release this anger. She may not even have anything to be angry about. It's just that pattern that she's created within herself that, ooh, every time I go to the gym, it's time to release anger. So it's like, well, you're creating that within yourself. You know what I mean? So having that healthy release when the feeling arises, not, oh, I've got to do this to get rid of anger that's been inside. It's like, no, 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 no. When you feel that emotion at that point in time, if you're having an argument with someone, you need to step back and go, fuck, I really need to feel this feeling right now, or it's going to take over me. And I don't want to respond with this energy. So how can you release that energy at that point in time before reacting? Right. So yeah, that was my aha moment.
Great. And so remember, we plan ahead.
Yeah.
So when the moment comes up, we're not caught by surprise. We're not overwhelmed. Now let's talk about what anger is. All right, because this is a lot of people don't understand what anger is. So many years ago, I was living in Los Angeles, and I'm driving down, and the freeways in Los Angeles are 6 lanes on each side, and there's cars, everywhere. And I'm driving down all the way in the left lane, right? And I'm not a slow driver, and I'm all the way in the left lane. And I looked down for a moment. I don't know if I was tuning the radio or something like that. And I looked up again, and there was a car right in front of me, going in the same direction, but there was no car in front of me a second earlier. But I didn't see it happen. So I was just like, oh, that's weird. And then I just got on with it. And then a second later, another car came right behind this guy. They were like kids with these souped up cars, and they were playing around, chasing each other. And when he cut in front of me, it was really close. It was tight. And I got afraid. I was afraid, right?
Right.
The minute he cleared my car and it was safe, the room was safe, there was safety in front of me, guess what the next feeling was? Anger. Those fucking kids. God damn. And I actually went out. This is how crazy I was. I went after them like I was going to do something. This is my insanity. But it taught me a very important lesson. Fear always precedes anger, which means if I'm angry, I'm really afraid.
You're right.
Oh, that's
now
awesome,
why is that?
Right?
Listen, one of the greatest people I can listen to nowadays is Mike Tyson. When that man talks, he talks about that. He tells you, I am the manifestation of fear. He says, I don't care how much you people fear me. I fear you 1,000% more than you could ever do me. And he goes, that's why I'm as violent as I am. I'm the man that I am because you make me feel this way. I mean, how freaking powerful is that? The most powerful man in the world is telling you that I fear you more than you do me.
Let me say this. I actually met Mike Tyson when I first got to LA.
Incredible.
Have you?
He's more afraid of himself. But I'm saying he's not. He thinks he's afraid of everybody else. Look, I can't speak for him. I'll speak for myself.
Right.
I used to think afraid of everybody else, but it turned out I was really afraid of me. My criticism, my rejection, my self-hatred. My self-hatred drove all my addictions, all my compulsive behavior, all my people-pleasing was driven by this sense of self-loathing, self-hatred. Remember, I had to go from being my own worst enemy to my own best friend, which is I'm nice to myself now. I love myself, and not in an egoic way. I'm just kind to myself. I know that I could trust myself not to abandon myself if I make a mistake, if I do something wrong, if somebody else rejects me. See, I don't have to learn to trust anybody else. I just have to learn to trust myself. When I'm angry, I'm really afraid. Now, why is that important? So this is what I learned through my own experience. If I'm angry and I go to somebody with anger, and I say, it's your fault. You did this. Get your shit together. I'm upset. You did this to me. You know, anger begets anger. They're not going to say, oh, gee, you know, you're right. You know, I'll change or whatever. They're going to get defensive, and they're going to respond with anger or react with anger, and nothing is going to get resolved. And it could come to blows. I mean, it could, you know, a lot of shit could happen.
No.
But if I go to them, if I go to that person and I say, and this is the truth, and I say, gee, you know, I'm really concerned about what happened. I'm afraid of, you know, the effect that it might have on me or my family. I'm afraid of the effect it may have on you or your family. If I express concern, and if I go to them and I say, I'm afraid, now all of a sudden they're not defensive because I'm not attacking them. And they may actually listen, and they may actually help me to resolve the problem. And I've had this exact experience with a neighbor, you know, and in the past, I would have attacked because I was right and they were wrong about what they did. And I was justified in being angry. But I realized that that only created more conflict. And so instead, when this next thing happened, I went to them and I actually wrote the guy a letter and I said, I'm really afraid. I'm concerned. I'm worried. And I need your help to figure out how to solve this problem. And the problem went away. The problem was resolved. So if I'm willing to be vulnerable and not take things personally and not feel justified and not seek to make somebody else wrong, I can actually find a solution to a problem that in the past there was no hope of solution.
I was in DMV here in New Jersey not a few months ago and listened to other people talking, and this black woman and this black guy in front of me were talking back and forth, and I just had to get in the conversation because that's the way I am. Anyway, this black woman next to me tells me, she goes, I don't care what you think. She goes, I'll tell you flat to your face. She goes, I hate white people. She goes, because you don't know what white people did to me. I'm like, no, you're right. I don't. And I told her, and she kept going on and on, spouting this shit. And finally I said to her, I said, listen, lady, I says, I agree with you. And she like gets these eyes. I says, listen, everything you're saying right now about white people, I agree with. And the fact is, I agree with everything that everybody says about that. And we can all do this back and forth. I said, the fact is, doesn't matter what you think about white people. Doesn't matter what white people think about you. It only hurts you by believing that. I said, because the white people that you know don't like you, don't give a shit that you don't like them back. You're hurting yourself by not allowing yourself to love any white person because you think that they're all the same as that 1% that affected you. And the same thing goes for white people that think that's the same thing about any type of person. It goes back to it. It's like you're taking this entire thing and bringing it to you, and it's affecting you more than it does other people because they don't give a shit how you feel to begin with. It's why you feel this way, because they don't give a shit. So you're only hurting yourself by allowing them to affect you that way. Right? But when it got done on that thing, and I sat there this lady, and I told her when I got up out of that DMV and walked out, she got up and hugged me. She goes, you're the first white guy I've ever hugged in my life.
I love that. Yeah.
It was like,
told
really?
you, Jimmy, you are the change agent, and you're doing it through love, not through making somebody
just
wrong.
telling the truth.
That's the highest form of love, to tell the truth.
Right. Right.
Here's the thing. People have to learn stuff the hard way sometimes. So she could go on.
It only hurts you.
But
when you hate somebody, they don't give a fuck. It's you that it hurts.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Am I wrong about that?
Hopefully she learned that lesson that day. And you know what?
She hugged me. She told me, she says, you're the first white guy I've ever hugged in my life. And I'm walking out of the DMV here in South Jersey. It's in West Deptford, man. And I'm like, F me, man. It's fucking this white girl or black lady's hugging me, telling me I was the first white guy she's ever hugged. And I talked to her for 20 minutes.
I have to tell you this, Jimmy, in another lifetime, you were a black woman. So get used to it.
Oh, I know it. I got more rhythm than a white man needs to have. I know I was black in some way of life.
Yeah, listen, we all live at the effect of our own prejudices and stereotypes. And when I can acknowledge my own self-loathing, my own self-hatred, and heal that, then I don't have to have prejudice. I don't have to have stereotypes, because that's all just a projection. And then the last part of the equation for me is this thing about having healthy boundaries. All right. So number one, you don't have to forgive anybody. It's your choice. You decide how you do it, if you do it. But I would suggest that make sure that whatever you do, you don't put yourself in harm's way. So if somebody is abusive, you don't go back into that situation and say, oh, I'm working on my spiritual path and I forgive you. You know, you're probably just going to get slammed again, right? And that's not loving yourself.
Mm.
So you got to love yourself first. And the way we love ourselves first is by having healthy boundaries. So we need to know what, and I go into great detail. I can't do it now, but in my book in chapter 7, 5 types of boundaries that I use. There are more or less, but the whole idea of a boundary is that we do what we need to do to take care of ourselves so we're safe.
Right.
Then we do what we need to do to help, to mend the relationship, whatever we need to do. But you've got to make sure that you take care of yourself first. And you have to put yourself first. Now, the last thing I'll say is sometimes forgiving somebody means we call the police. Because that's the loving thing to do in that situation. See, we can do whatever we need to do as long as we're doing it from a place of love. And having spent a lot of time in 12-step programs and hearing people share about, the car wrecks of their lives, sometimes being arrested for your behavior is a wake-up call that will help that person turn a corner in their life. Now, you don't know that necessarily, but you need to do what you need to do to take care of yourself. And if you do it from a place of love, rather than vengeance, rather than anger, rather than trying to get even, then you're on the right path with all this. All right. Ultimately, forgiveness may mean that you leave the relationship or you remove that person from your house, whatever the situation is. It doesn't, I just want to emphasize again, forgiveness does not mean we become a doormat, does not mean we put ourselves in harm's way, all of that, because it wouldn't make any sense to forgive somebody if they're just going to, if you let them come back and continue to hurt you or abuse you. All right. So that's what I have to say about forgiveness. It starts by, again, not taking things personally in casual situations. And it could go to the point and leaving a conversation or whatever to, doing whatever we need to do, police, suing somebody in court if they, if there's a business transaction, whatever, do what you need to do, but do it from a place of love, not from a place of being a victim. Yeah. The victim mentality, there's a woman named Pia Melody. She writes a lot about codependency. And she says, resentment is victim anger. So I know now whenever I'm in resentment mode, I'm in victim mode. And victim mode means you have power over me. Victim mode means, now I'm entitled to get even or whatever. I'm not saying that sometimes people don't do things that injures us or harms us. But again, we have to decide how we're going to respond to that rather than react. And if I respond as or react as a victim, I'm giving my power away.
Right.
Right now, my main focus is my filmmaking, and I have 4 projects. They're all kind of spiritually based, spiritually themed projects. And my goal, my mission now in life is to help all of us remember who we really are, to remember our divine nature, our spiritual nature, and to remember the fact that we are not what we think we are in these bodies, but we're something much greater. And we are, in a very real sense, divine. We're light beings. We were, Course in Miracles says, love created you like itself.
Right.
We are love. That's what we really are. Now, we say, Peter, you're out of your mind. Look at the world. Look at what we do to each other. And I will say, yes, you're right. Okay, we're not living our highest potential right now. It's pretty obvious. We're not expressing who we really are. Yes, I agree. That's pretty obvious. But we're all here, in my opinion, to be part of this. And this is what you guys are doing. You know, your podcast, Awakened Minds. You're part of the awakening. Now, what are we awakening to? We're awakening to who we really are, our true self, and who everybody else is. So that is
The
my
God
goal
within
with
us.
the God within us. You are God, Jimmy.
That's
Natalie,
right.
you are God. I am God. We are all God expressing itself in this dimension, this physical dimension. And we came here with a purpose. We came here on purpose, intentionally. And we came here because we know that we have the ability to make a contribution at whatever level that is to the shift, to the change that's happening. So the main project that I want to talk about is my documentary. The documentary is entitled What Every Soul Knows, The Secret to Remembering Who We Really Are. Now, what I'm doing is I'm interviewing, I was in Washington, D.C. last week. There was a conference for the International Association of Near-Death Studies, IANS. So their website, it's a nonprofit, IANS.org, great organization. They not only support research, but they also provide support for people who have these experiences and who feel stigmatized, who feel marginalized, because a lot of people will have a near-death experience and then they try to tell their doctor or their family, and they think they're crazy.
Yeah.
You know, there's some stigma that gets associated with it. So they provide a lot of support. There are local support groups. There are online support groups. Great organization. So I reached out to them. I'm a member, but I reached out to them and I said, look, I'm working on this documentary. And I don't really have time to go into how I started on this journey, other than to say that I'm realizing this is my mission. This is my calling. And the project is I'm interviewing, at this point, I already have 25 interviews in the can with people who have either experienced near-death experiences themselves or other spiritually transformative experiences. And Natalie, I used to watch your podcast when you had all these people on. And you were one of the podcasts that I watched when I started on this journey about 3 years ago.
Incredible.
And thank you. So thank you for that. People, they've either had these experiences or they're psychic or mediums. So they have that ability to communicate with other dimensions, other realms, other beings. Or there are people who have studied this in one way or another, and they're very familiar with all of that. And so what I'm doing is I have a series of questions. I'm asking everybody the same questions. And I'm shooting everybody on green screen, as you can see behind me. And I'm going to do something along the lines of What the Bleep Do We Know? Do you guys remember that documentary from 2000?
Dr. Joe Dispenza.
Joe, by the way, I did a week with Dr. Joe in Niagara Falls in 2019. Fucking intense.
I love it.
Oh, Natalie's in love with that man. She's gonna go ahead.
He's the bomb. Getting up at 4 a.m. to meditate for 2 hours in the convention center with 1,500 other people.
Right.
And then also the 2006 documentary, The Secret. I want to do something along those lines. So the thing that's happening is all these people are coming to me and they're saying, yes, I want to be involved. Yes, this is great. And at first I was like, you know, maybe this will be a little something from my YouTube channel, but now it's like, people are freaking out. People really see, and some of these people are psychics and they're telling me this is going to be a really important project. So I'm like, okay, all right. So did the interviews. Now I'm starting to edit to go through the interviews. I want to do kind of animations so it's not just talking heads, it's also some kind of a recreation or animation of the topic that they're discussing. So for instance, if they're talking about the life review, many of these people have had life reviews, they talk about what it is, and what I want to do is have a way to immerse the viewer in that experience of the life review. So I'm thinking of doing some kind of animation or illustrations that will help people understand that experience. So I have this whole idea and I want to do the music and really make it a significant thing. As I sit here now, I don't know how that's going to happen. I'm financing all of this out of my own pocket. My pockets are not as deep as they used to be, I'll tell you that. But I feel like everything is just kind of falling into place. And it's one of those things where, they talk about when you're in the flow, when you're on purpose, life conspires to help you with it. And that seems to be what's happening with this project. So, my feeling is, again, we started the conversation with this, and we can end here if we want, but this question of who do you think you are is the most important question you can ever ask yourself. Because whether it's I'm lovable, I'm not lovable, I'm capable, I'm not capable, I can do this thing, I can't do this thing, or I'm a physical being, and when life is over, that's it, and I got to get what I can get while I can get it, and fuck everybody else. It's every man for himself. It's survival of the fittest. Or I think I'm something greater than that. I'm a spiritual being, that I'm one with everybody, and that all of this is kind of an illusion, or kind of again, as Patricia said, it's like a Broadway play where everybody is playing their role, and when it's over, the curtain closes, but when it opens again, everybody's holding hands and everybody bows in front of the audience. If that's how you see yourself as one of those players, you will live your life in a different way. And that's what all of this is about. How do we live our lives now in a different way based on who we think we are, how we see ourselves?
Goosebumps.
I want to be part of this awakening, part of this message, and saying, don't look anywhere except in the mirror. And then it's not even discovering it's not even discovering who you are. It's deciding who you are. You choose it. You decide it. You make it happen. You are creating your life in every minute, and you don't even know it. There's no such thing as a bad choice or a wrong decision if we do two things. Okay. Number one is learn from our mistakes. But number two, we'll never learn from our mistakes if we beat ourselves up for them. So we got to forgive ourselves for our shortcomings. We got to love and forgive ourselves when we're less than perfect. Right. And then the thing I was going to say, Jimmy, and everybody else who's listening, if you want to change the world, you start with yourself, and then you just impact one other person. Okay. And your guys are doing that right now with what you're doing. You are impacting at least one other person. I know you impacted me when I watched your last podcast. And what happens is, this is how we change the world. You impact me, then I go and I impact another person, and then that person impacts two other people, and then those two people impact other people. And before you know it, the world has changed.
But don't get it twisted. You need to do the shadow work. You need to get in that self-love mode, and you need to have that power stance of owning your shit, living in your authentic truth, and knowing who the fuck you are. And then you can go forth and change the world and let the others know exactly what you just taught here today, Peter. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.